this is really interesting. So Steve Baughman is probably best known in the Christian evangelical and apologetics community as the author of Cover Up in the Kingdom, which really began the exposure of Ravi Zacharias as a habitual liar and sexual predator. Baughman is an atheist, and that's going to become relevant in a second. Well, he's also, I've known Steve for several years now, and Steve's, always been one of these very open-minded, critically thinking, reflecting atheists. He sent a letter to William Lane Craig, which Craig posted on Reasonable Faith. So in the letter, he recalls how 20 years ago he had dinner with William Lane Craig and his wife Jan, and how Craig presented really articulated well his arguments for Christianity and responding to Steve's various objections to Christianity. But what most impacted Steve, as he recalls in the letter, was the warmth and hospitality of Craig's wife, Jan, who gave him a hug at the end of the evening. And that really impacted him. I'm going to link the letter below. I mean, the whole thing is a very well written and engaging, and just says a lot about the role of evidence versus personal contact, kindness, hospitality in helping people rethink their belief system. What really impacted me, and Steve shared this with me and found this quite intriguing, was what Craig said in reply to this letter. So we're going to just take a look at the letter now, and specifically at the part where Craig talks about Ravi Zacharias. So May 11th, 2025, here is Steve's letter. Check it out again. It's, as I said, it's really nicely written and engaging. So here is Craig's reply. Now, Craig recalls the conversation with him and how that was very interesting and enjoyable. And then he says this, look at this. I have a related story of my own to tell that you'll find interesting. Shortly before his demise, Ravi Zacharias and his wife Margie invited Jan and me to breakfast at a local restaurant. During the course of our conversation, he complained to us about how you were going after him, trying to bring him down. Then he warned me, Bill, he told me that you're next on his list. He's going to be coming after you. I braced myself emotionally for the predicted onslaught, but it never came. Now I know why. The fact that after 20 long years you should reach out to me suggests you are still open to Christian belief. And then he goes on and talks about Christian belief. This is stunning for several reasons. First of all, I've talked to Steve about this. He said what Ravi Zacharias says here is a flat out lie. He never said to Ravi Zacharias, you're next on that Bill Craig is next on my list. Steve was never targeting Bill Craig. Steve simply had all this evidence coming that Ravi Zacharias was a liar, a fabulist, and ultimately a predator. And he wanted Christians to accept accountability for this and to address it. And repeatedly, Christian leaders refused to do so. Had nothing to do with a broader attack on other apologists like William Lane Craig. So that's just weird. But what really strikes me about this, so if you're going to recall an anecdote about Ravi Zacharias, you're going to preface this with, well, of course, we now know that the guy was a fabulous habitual liar and a sexual predator, and yet there's nothing of that. You would never know from what William Craig says here that there was any scandal associated with Ravi Zacharias at all. Nor is there any evidence in Craig that he's reflecting on the fact that Ravi Zacharias was not a reliable narrator, that he was a liar and a shyster. Instead, Craig implies that this was actually true. He seems to think, so far as I can see, that this was true, that what Ravi Zacharias relayed was true. And the only reason that Steve didn't ultimately go after Craig was because he still had this lingering openness to Christian belief. that dated back to their conversation, some years earlier. He never considers that, in fact, Rabbi Zacharias was throughout his life a straight up habitual liar, and he was lying to Craig here. So I'm not sure what to do with this. But it seems to me that William Lane Craig has not yet come to terms with the fact that one of the central Christian apologists was a serial sexual predator and habitual liar who lived a double life. And that his whole Christian apologetics presentation appears to have been, so far as I can see, a facade in order to promote himself and to get into a position where he used his ministry to exploit other people for his own sexual gratification. And there's just no awareness of that in Craig's recollection of this anecdote shortly before Rabbi Zacharias died. And it's shocking to have somebody like Craig, who, as intelligent as he is, appears to be so utterly fatuous in recalling this exchange that he still thinks Rabbi Zacharias is somehow a reliable narrator about his interactions with Steve Bothman. And the total lack of awareness that Steve Bothman was doing his civic duty in calling out this sexual predator, instead thinking somehow he was on some tirade just to attack Christian apologists. This is a devastating indictment, I think, of William Lane Craig. And to the extent that these attitudes still persist among the evangelical industrial complex, evangelical apologetic industrial complex, this is a broader indictment of that subculture. So Ravi Zacharias was a liar. Ravi Zacharias was a manipulator. Ravi Zacharias was a sexual predator. And if you're going to recall any anecdotes about this individual, they need to be prefaced by that. They need to be prefaced by the statement that his word is worthless. It's worth nothing. And that any claims he's going to make about other people, you don't take them with a grain of salt, you take them with a salt quarry worth of salt. There's none of that awareness here, and I find that to be profoundly disappointing and disturbing.